seems as if every kid has come home with a goldfish at one time or another, and at first they're cute and full of wonder to watch, swimming around their bowl. But eventually, goldfish become a chore, and often it turns into the parents' job to take care of them. That's when millions of families do exactly what Julie did, take their children's goldfish to the local pond to set them free.
Frankly, they just lost interest in taking care of it. And I did not want to be responsible for one more living thing. So we took it down and very ceremoniously put it in a local pond. And I thought, well, it's not going to live very long, but it's not going to be my problem.
Spring may be the most frequent season for goldfish to be turned loose in a lake or pond, especially in cold weather regions where ice is just breaking up. Randy Anhorn, District Administrator for the 9 Mile Creek Watershed District in Minnesota, says some stories are all too typical.
One of the local elementary schools nearby Lake Cornelia, years back, used to give out goldfish as part of their winter festival. And one can assume that following a winter of having a goldfish in the bowl, kids may get sick of them, and people not wanting to dispose of the goldfish, put it into the lake, and you end up with a situation that we have.
The situation Anhorn has is a lake that's overcrowded with destructive fish. It turns out that putting goldfish in a pond or lake is about the worst thing you can do with them. Goldfish are invasive and kill off the water for everything else. Jordan Wine, an environmental scientist for the Minnesota environmental and engineering firm WSB, says those goldfish you put in a pond won't be little for long.
Well, I was just out on a very large lake, 50,000 acres out in California, that is more productive because it doesn't freeze over the winter. So likely they're growing faster. But on average, those fish were between 3 and 4 pounds a piece. So 17 inches, something bigger than the size of your dinner plate.
But it's not just the size of the fish that's the problem. It's also what they do when they're in an environment that's bigger than a goldfish bowl.
They act a lot like their close relatives, the common carp. They feed on the bottom of the lakes. So they're looking around, they're rooting around in the sediment and disrupting kind of that bottom layer of the lake. They're looking for things like little worms and invertebrates and sometimes seeds and things that are just usually kind of sitting in that upper layer of the bottom of the lake. And as they do that, they're grabbing a mouthful of this sediment and they're sifting through it and they're finding what they want to eat, but the rest of it just kind of gets kicked up into the water column. And you can imagine what that would do just by physically looking at it, because it's a lot more murky of a water body, because there's now a bunch more mud that's been, we call it turbated. A lot of times what's happening is as they are releasing these sediments and turning them around, they're releasing phosphorus, which is essentially algae food.
But while goldfish are making lakes tough to live in for everyone else, they have no problem living in those conditions themselves. Even a totally frozen lake may not be enough to kill them.
There are a lot of times they're shallow lakes that are susceptible to fish winter kills. A lot of times it's because the dissolved oxygen gets so low that they just can't survive long periods of such low oxygen in the water. But it turns out that goldfish seem to be some of the toughest fish to survive the lowest oxygen levels. In fact, there's research that shows that as the oxygen in the water approaches zero, they can actually change their physiology to not even need that much oxygen and survive basically when all other fish are going to suffer winter kills.
Obviously, experts would love to get rid of goldfish where they've taken over. In some Minnesota lakes, the nets have pulled out more than 50,000 of them. But Anhorn admits experts aren't sure what to do about the problem beyond that.
Because we've studied carp for years and know some management strategies. And although carp and goldfish are somewhat similar, we don't really know 100% if those same management strategies will work for goldfish. So we have been trying out different options for them.
In fact, Wine says pulling goldfish out of the lakes is actually the easy part. The hard part is keeping them from coming back.
When there's one chance for those invasive fish to take over, they usually make good on their advantage over those other native fish. And once they've taken hold, it's really hard to get the ecology to move back in native fish. So they're invasive fish. And one of the reasons, coupled with their ability to survive in such harsh conditions, is their ability to reproduce like crazy. And potentially in conditions that they make the lake into themselves and make it so potential native predators and competitors are now at a disadvantage by the way that they've changed the lake.
All of that seems to make goldfish just about the perfect invader of almost any fresh water they find. But most parents don't know that, so when their kids lose interest in the fishbowl, it's almost inevitable that they take it to the local pond.
Maybe people just never really understood that it was, or maybe could even believe that this is goldfish. This is coming from these little fish that I was having trouble keeping alive in my fishing bowl on the counter in perfectly clear water. There's no way that they would have survived and thrived and made these populations. So there may have been these invasions going on under our nose, and we just couldn't believe that that's what it was.
So Wine says the kind-hearted parent who doesn't want to euthanize a goldfish in front of their kids is probably killing off a much greater number of other species.
I guess to that individual fish, maybe you're right. But what ends up happening is hundreds, if not thousands, of other fish that you didn't want to suffer, that are native and that are in good balance in the lake next door, they will be suffering.
Ann Horn suggests making goldfish part of your garden compost instead. Other families simply flush the fish down the toilet, even though goldfish can live through almost anything.
Flushing them down the toilet, they wouldn't survive. They'd end up going to a wastewater treatment plant and go through the various different steps through the plant to achieve cleaner water to be discharged back out into a river or wherever it's going.
Generally, actually, if you were to flush a goldfish down the toilet, it actually goes to a different system and it would be treated with wastewater systems. And so it's very unlikely that if you actually are flushing a goldfish down the toilet, that goldfish will end up in a lake.
However, kids sometimes get upset at compost or flushing, so Wine says the best choice might be to take the fish to a pet store where a new owner can be found, and your local lake can be left alone. You can find out more about all of our guests at our website, radiohealthjournal.org. For more behind the scenes, search Radio Health Journal on Facebook and Instagram. Our production manager is Jason Dickey. I'm Nancy Benson. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
On average, annually, diamond exports are about $3 billion a year from Russia.
The diamonds that are helping fund Russia's war.
Then why haven't we found a cure for a common disorder that makes people aggressive and reckless?
It's a huge problem, and I'm always appalled by the fact that no one seems to care.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence, the producer and host of Radio Health Journal. If you like listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
What we need people to really think about is how can they build the skills that they need to maintain their emotional well-being for the long term.
Shifting from reactive care to preventative care in the mental health space. Then,
at this point, I think as prices continue to rise, we have to make more choices of things that we're going to buy, and more often, what are we going to live with a little longer than we might used to.
The financial squeeze of inflation. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Radio Health Journal and Viewpoints on your favorite radio station. And subscribe and listen anytime on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Also, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Radio Health Journal.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.